Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today, we're going to be talking about the Grim Reaper himself, Gregory Scarpa Sr. Now, Greg Scarpa is unlike anyone I've covered on this channel. On one hand, he was a stone killer, and he enjoyed his job. On the other hand, while most gangsters waited until they had no other choice but to rat, he was an informant for the FBI for most of his career, and he used it as a license to kill. Gregory Scarpa was born May 8th, 1928, to Salvatore and Mary Scarpa, who came to the U.S. from a small town in the northwest corner of Italy. Greg and his brother Salvatore grew up in the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn. Greg was a big kid growing up and soon got a reputation for being good with his hands and for being extremely violent. In the late 1940s, his brother Sal became an associate in the Profaci crime family, and by 1950, Greg had joined his older brother. His first pinch in 1950. On November 1st, at around 11:45 a.m., he and three pals were sitting in his car in front of the Benson and Hedges cigarette factory at 585 Water Street. An off-duty officer who lived nearby was sitting at his window and noticed the man walk up to the car and toss a white bundle into it and walk off briskly. The officer continued to observe until 1:15 p.m. when the four men got out and began to amble around the area. Officer Patrick Kelly called the cops, and he and three other officers arrested the four men. They told the cops that they were walking around to beat the heat, and it had nothing to do with the $16,000 payroll that was being delivered in a few minutes. The cops found a pistol and a blackjack wrapped in a white sheet in the back seat of the car. Because it was Greg's car, he was charged with the weapon. He was given a $3,500 bail, and he must have pleaded out or something because he never did time for the charge. In October 1959, a burglar and gunman for hire named Anthony Bang Bang Brandolfini was walking to a female friend's house at 59th Street and 9th Avenue. When he got a few feet from the house, the car that had been following him dropped a string of firecrackers out the window and sped towards him. And then shots rang out. Using the firecrackers as a distraction, the men in the car fired at Brandolfini. Bang Bang was hit with a volley of shots. He ducked and scrambled into an alley. Fearing that they might stop the car and come back, he broke a window and climbed into the building and called for help. When the police arrived, he told them that a group of men had fired at him, but he laughed when the officer asked him who shot him. He said he would handle it himself. At first, his injuries were thought to be minor, until an x-ray revealed that he had been shot 5 times, but he would survive. Greg and the 3 others were arrested separately, but with no hard evidence, he was only hit with a charge for consorting with known criminals. By 1960, Greg had established himself as an earner. He moved his wife and young son Greg Jr. to a big home at 43 Marshall Place on Staten Island. In 1960, Greg was arrested along with 7 other men by the FBI for their involvement in an international hijacking ring. Greg was charged with stealing 18 rolls of cotton piece goods from a truck back in December 11, 1959. The FBI claimed that the ring had stolen over $100,000 worth of goods in the past year. The gang's MO was always the same. The driver would be taken by gunpoint and held hostage until the freight was unloaded and the stolen truck was abandoned. Carmine Persico Jr. and Salvatore John Albanese, who were seen as the ringleaders, were given $10,000 and Scarpa was released on $5,000 bail. While waiting for his trial, Greg was approached by the FBI for information on his brother Sal, who was a fugitive, but with no luck. In August, when the Profaci Gallo War broke out, he was visited again in his social club. They offered to make his legal problems go away if he agreed to give them information on the Mafia. After 2 or 3 visits, Greg, who was polite and respectful, asked them not to come around anymore. He didn't want people to start to ask why he was talking to the FBI. They gave him a number to call if he changed his mind. On October 27, 1961, Greg called the number and asked to meet with an agent. On November 21st, Greg Scarpa was designated under the top echelon criminal informant program. Because of his position in the Colombo family, he was not given a symbol number. He reported directly to his handler. Right off the bat, Greg began to feed the FBI with information. He told of a shipment of Marlboro cigarettes that was stolen in Florida that was on its way to New York. When the FBI agents checked with the Florida office, they confirmed that a truckload of Marlboros had been stolen. This gave him instant credibility. He went on to tell the FBI what was really going on in the Profaci Gallo War. According to Greg, some of the Profacis didn't want the Gallos to join the family. They were not the right kind of people, they argued. But others were making a lot of money with them, and they ultimately received their buttons. When they were made, they began to run wild and push for more and more authority in the family, and it was decided that they would be taken care of. He also revealed the plan to eliminate them. On the day that Larry Gallo was strangled in the Sahara Club, the plan was to kill Larry, Tony Abatamarco, and John Schemi that day and make them disappear. They were all facing charges, so to the law, it would seem as if they went on a lam. Then Joe Gallo would be contacted and told to come down for a powwow, and that his brother was there. Joe Gallo would have been disposed of when he walked in. But we know how it really went down, and if you don't, go check out the video I did on the gallows. Greg was under family concierge Charles Lo Cicero, to whom he was loyal to without question. He was willing to accept any orders or requests made by him. During the war, Lo Cicero stayed out of it and tried to mediate, so that meant Greg stayed out too. He stated that if the Profacis would have retaliated against Lo Cicero for his efforts to mediate, he would have joined the gallows. He told the feds about the commission and named all the 5 families in New York and their bosses, except for Joe Bonanno, whose name he could not recall. He's told how the Mafia started and how guys got made, including details on the ceremony. This was April 9th, 1962, a few months before Joe Valachi would turn rat and spill the beans to the whole country. Greg was paid well by the FBI for his information, and I'm sure he saw this as just another hustle and a get-out-of-jail-free card. He told the FBI that he was a captain in the Profaci family and he had 10 men under him. He told him that since he started working for them, he had ceased all activities relating to the family, except for those that were absolutely necessary. He hustled another $3,000 out of him, saying that he needed it to get closer to the higher-ups in the family. Meanwhile, Greg was becoming a rich man, mostly through his numbers rackets. The rest from gambling, loan sharking, hijacking, fencing, stolen goods, extortion, you know, the usual. His crew operated out of the Wimpy Boys Social Club at 1275 74th Street in Dyker Heights, Brooklyn. When Joe Profaci died in 1962, Greg was summoned to the house of Ambrose Magliocco to give his vote for the new boss. Joseph Magliocco, Ambrose's brother, won the election. The commission approved his appointment and he became boss of the Profaci family. Lo Cicero told Greg that Joe was going to reignite the war with the gallows since he had been one of the people they kidnapped when the war started. Lo Cicero had begun to work with the gallows and was not happy about this. A few months later, he gave Greg the contract to kill Magliocco. Greg and the driver cased Magliocco's Long Island estate. This was September 11th. Lo Cicero told him that he should have the commission approval on the 12th or the 13th. Lo Cicero would not get the okay, and he left for Italy. Greg backed off the hit. Later that year, one of Greg's best number runners ran off on him and left Greg owing a lot of money. The man's name is redacted, so I don't know who he is, but Greg put the word out for him to be located and brought to him. The runner reached out to Greg, and Greg told him he could consider the debt even if he never showed his face in Brooklyn again. And if he was seen in Brooklyn, he knew what the consequences would be, and then he hung up. The runner called Greg back and told him that a good fellow would be getting in touch with him in order to straighten out the money owed. Greg asked who would be calling. The runner said Junior, meaning Carmine Persico Jr. A few days later, Carmine Persico reached out to Greg and he said that the man offered to pay back the money in weekly installments. Greg refused. He said that the money had to be paid in a lump sum. Carmine asked for more time to raise the money and Greg said okay. On July 7th, 1962, Persico called Greg again and told him that the guy couldn't raise the money. Greg said then he'll have to face the consequences. Persico told him that he had vouched for him and that Greg was making it so he had to stay with the man 24 hours a day to keep him safe. Greg didn't care. Greg was then called to another meeting in the office of Ambrose Magliocco. There representing Carmine Persico Jr. was Benny D'Alessandro. Benny told Greg that Carmine would give the runner back if Greg paid him for the losses he would incur. Greg said no deal, and another meeting was set up. This time, Greg said that he would take the runner back, but with no conditions. After going back and forth, Ambrose Magliocco told Benny to stay out of it. Benny said, "Are you trying to tell me what to do?" Ambrose said, "I'm not telling you anything. I'm just repeating what my brother said. And if you have any questions, you should take it up with Joe." He said that Joe Magliocco and Carlo Gambino were going to iron everything out. Now, you may wonder what Carlo Gambino had to do with this. Well, the runner, fearing for his life, went to members of the Gambino family for help, and they vouched for him until the issue was resolved. Rumor has it that a sit-down overseen by Carlo Gambino took place where Greg stated his case and was told to leave the room while the runner told his story. Greg was then walked outside by a couple of guys. He didn't know if he won the decision or not and was worried that he might get clipped. As he walked away, the runner was walked out and was never seen again. In 1963, Joe Magliocco gave one of his captains a murder contract. The contract was to kill Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese. The capo was Joe Colombo. Instead of carrying out the contract, Joe Colombo went to Carlo Gambino and told him of the plot. He revealed to Carlo that Magliocco and Joe Bonanno were planning to kill all the other bosses and take over the commission. Bonanno and Magliocco were summoned to a meeting. They confessed and were both shown mercy by the rest of the bosses and were allowed to retire. Magliocco would be dead in a few months of natural causes. And for his services, Joe Colombo was named the new boss of the Profaci family by Carlo Gambino. In June of 1964, 3 civil rights workers went missing in Philadelphia, Mississippi. President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered the FBI to find the missing men or bring the killers to justice. The FBI stayed in Mississippi for a whole year with no luck. Only the charred remains of the station wagon the men were traveling in was recovered. The FBI reached out to Greg for help. Greg went first to Florida, where he was taken to Mississippi by agents. His target was an appliance salesman. Greg interrogated the man, and the man gave him a location, but it proved to be false. This happened the next time too. On the third time, Greg borrowed a gun from one of the agents and stuck it in the man's mouth. "If you don't tell me where the kids are, I will blow your brains all over the wall." Later, the bodies of the 3 men were located. 16 people were arrested and 7 were convicted, including the sheriff. On January 27, 1968, Greg assaulted David Boucher in front of a Pleasant Plains drugstore and threatened to do the same to David Drennan if he didn't keep his mouth shut. Both Davids went to the police and Greg was arrested. In June, as they were leaving the courthouse, Greg once again threatened Drennan on the steps. This was witnessed by another man, and Greg was arrested again and charged with witness intimidation. The case would drag out for 3 years before Boucher took the stand and said that Greg Scarpa was not the man who assaulted him. On January 30th, 1968, 3 days after the Boucher assault, Greg, his 16-year-old son Gregory Scarpa Jr., and another 16-year-old beat up Joseph Longaria in front of his home at 7614 Amboy Road. The 39-year-old Scarpa was arrested along with the 2 16-year-olds for assault. A few days later, after reconsidering his life, Joseph Longaria dropped the charges and the 3 were let go. In 1970, Greg Sr. and Jr. were arrested along with 4 others for hijacking a truck containing $70,000 in Scotch whiskey from a New Jersey pier. Again, the case dragged on for years before going away. On June 16, 1971, a professional mail thief named Robert Kudak testified under heavy guard in front of a Senate Investigations Committee. He said that he helped steal over $100 million worth of securities and other valuables from Kennedy and other airports, along with Anthony Tony Boy Boyardi of Newark and John Sonny Franzese of Long Island. He was arrested and given a $4,500 bail. In July, Greg was summoned to testify in front of a Senate Investigation Subcommittee. Kudak had given testimony that he was glad that he was not dealing with Scarpa anymore because he was dangerous and he feared for his life. He would often deal with Scarpa and take less money instead of taking the merchandise to someone who would pay him what it's worth. He was afraid that if Greg found out, he would kill him. When Greg took the stand, a senator asked if he thought that he was a dangerous man. Greg responded, "Do you think I am?" And then he went on to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights 60 times. A week after Greg's Senate hearing testimony, on August 6th, his son, Greg Jr., now 22, was pulled over by police as he came out of a car wash in a white caddy, a stolen white caddy. The officers asked him to back up into the driveway to get out of the road. Young Scarpa backed up a few feet and then threw the car in the drive and gunned the engine. The car took off, hitting one of the officers in the hip, knocking him down. Greg Jr. then drove through the streets of Staten Island, reaching speeds of 100 miles an hour. The car was found abandoned 2 blocks from the Scarpa home at 43 Marshall Place. The police came to the door and Mrs. Scarpa told him that her son was not home. When Greg Sr. came home, he barred the police from entering his property. 20 cops surrounded the home while they figured out how to arrest Greg Jr. They decided to get a warrant, but before the detectives came back, Greg Jr. gave himself up and was taken to the station and charged with felonious assault, 6 traffic violations, and was given a $2,000 bail. His trial was dragged out for years before Greg Jr. pleaded guilty in 1973. He was given 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. On November 4th, 1971, Greg Scarpa's wife was home alone when the police kicked the door in and shoved a shotgun in her face and even threatened to shoot the dog if she didn't tell him where Greg was. Greg was wanted in Chicago. He was charged with 10 others with operating a $446,000 New York to Chicago stolen securities ring. They were accused of stealing bonds and securities from the U.S. mail. Greg wasn't home, but he went to Chicago and answered the police. He was charged and released on bail while he awaited trial. In 1971 and 72, the Colombo family was in turmoil. On June 28, 1971, Joe Colombo was shot as he walked to take the stage and address the crowd at the Italian Day festivities in Columbus Square. In April of 1972, Joe Gallo was killed in Umberto's clam house in Little Italy. The police thought that it was a gang war going on, and Greg may have used this opportunity to remove one of his co-defendants in the Chicago case. On Monday, April 10, 1972, Gennaro Ciparo was walking out of his restaurant when an unknown shooter walked up to him and shots rang out. Ciparo was shot and he died in front of his restaurant. He had $1,300 in cash and a loaded pistol on his body. The police tied the death to the Gallo shooting, but Greg may have been doing some house cleaning. On June 7, 1974, Greg pleaded guilty in the U.S. District Court of Newark, New Jersey for stealing $520,000 in securities and conspiring to counterfeit $4 million in IBM stock. He got probation. On March 11, 1976, Greg Sr. and Jr. were arrested in the Wimpy Boys Social Club by officers of the Brooklyn South Public Morals Squad. Greg Sr. was charged with being the head of a numbers operation. This didn't come as a surprise to Greg. The investigation had been going on for 21 months, and he repeatedly tried to find out if he was being investigated. He made 3 payments that totaled $700 to police for information. And on top of his gambling charges, bribery charges were added. Again, the FBI got him off. And then, Greg got into a heated shouting match with an FBI assistant director about money that was promised to him for his assistance. After this, the FBI cut ties with Greg. Up to this point, Greg had lived a charmed life. Cases that would have sent most cases to jail disappeared for Greg. Now that was done. Over the next few years, he stayed off of the radar, but never too far. When his brother Salvatore and 2 others were arrested and charged with stealing over $200,000 from the city of New York through a fake nonprofit, it came out that the nonprofit's executive officer, Stephen Corson, was a friend of Greg's, and the police claimed that the 2 were involved in smuggling illegal guns to a Middle Eastern country. In the early 80s, Greg was approached by FBI Special Agent Lindy DeVecchio about returning to his job as an informant in exchange for the FBI turning a blind eye to his dealings except for murder. In 1985, Greg paid $9,000 for 300 blank credit cards from an undercover Secret Service agent. The cards had a street value of $1.5 million. He was arrested and was facing 7.5 years. Again, the FBI stepped in. This was right in the middle of the federal RICO case against the 5 bosses, and Greg had valuable intel. In 1986, Greg Scarpa went to the hospital complaining of stomach pain, and he was diagnosed with bleeding ulcers. Greg was in bad shape, and the doctors couldn't stop the bleeding, and it was decided that part of his stomach needed to be removed. Greg had lost a lot of blood and would need a transfusion for the surgery. He was afraid to use the blood the hospital had from blood donations, which had been screened for safety. He was afraid that he was going to get the blood of a black person. He didn't want black blood in him. He didn't use those terms, but you get it. He had his girlfriend tell the family and his crew to donate blood. The surgery was successful, and Greg went home to recover. On January 14, 1987, Greg's brother Salvatore Scarpa was in a Wimpy Boys Social Club when 5 armed men with pistols, one wearing a mask, and demanded everyone lay face down on the floor. They were relieved of their money and their jewelry. Salvatore told the man wearing the mask, "There are kids in here. Take what you want and get out." But the man was not there for the money. He wanted Salvatore's life. The masked man raised his gun and shots rang out. In front of 10 witnesses, including Greg's son Joey, Salvatore was shot once in the back and 3 times in the head. The masked men made their escape. The witnesses told the police that the men were black, but the police, more importantly Greg, knew better. Salvatore was involved with a lot of rackets, and the police believed that it was his narcotics business that was stepping on the toes of others. Sick or not, Greg was not going to let this go without someone dying. And when it was over, 7 people would end up losing their lives. Greg found out who was behind him: Vincent Carini. Vincent and Enrico Carini, 26 and 23 years old, were minor league drug dealers and tough guys determined to shoot their way to the top. At around 10:30 p.m. on June 12th, a man noticed 2 cars blocking the driveway to his home on Avenue X in Sheepshead Bay. The next morning, he noticed that the cars were still there. When he went outside, he found Enrico Carini dead in the backseat of a white 1985 Chevrolet. He called the police. When they arrived, they noticed the car behind it, a 1982 blue Oldsmobile, contained the body too. It was Vincent Carini. He had been shot 9 times in the back of the head, and his brother had been shot 4 times in the chest. The police tied this murder to a man who was found shot in his car around 3:30 a.m. on Shore Parkway in Brooklyn. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition. He told the police that he shot himself. He was pals with the Carinis. Salvatore Di Demencio was part of Scarpa's crew. He was indicted in the FBI fraud case along with Greg in 1974. They had recently had a fallout, and Di Demencio left the crew. Greg found out that he knew about the plan to kill his brother. He was found well-dressed, still wearing his gold watch, gold bracelet, and gold necklaces, with 3 bullets in his head and chest in the backseat of a still-running stolen car in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, on September 18th. In the mid-1980s, the Scarpa crew took advantage of the crack epidemic that broke out in Brooklyn. Scarpa was fed information on his rivals by the FBI and was given a list of people that the DEA was looking at. His son, Greg Jr., was on the list. In November 1987, police arrested Greg Jr. and 9 others and charged them with running a narcotics ring on Staten Island and Brooklyn. The court documents charged that they killed 2 men and beat another in order to gain control of the crack and marijuana rackets. Greg Scarpa Jr. jumped bail and went on the lam. In March of 1988, he was featured on America's Most Wanted. He was found guilty in absentia and was eventually found hiding in a hotel with his wife and daughter in Lakewood, New Jersey, and sentenced to 20 years. By the end of the 1980s, the federal government had successfully prosecuted the heads of the 5 families in New York, save one, Paul Castellano, who got his own form of street justice in December 1985. Carmine Persico Jr. was not a family boss, but he was locked up for 135 years and the family was leaderless. In 1990, Persico agreed to let Vic Arena run the family until his son Alley Boy Persico came home from jail in 91. But Arena had other ideas. The top seat felt comfortable and he wanted to make it permanent. He was friends with Gambino boss John Gotti, and Arena met with Gotti and Gotti gave his support for him keeping the job. Carmine Persico was not happy. So one day in the spring of 1991, Lil Vic Arena walked out of his house. Being a lifelong criminal, he scanned up and down the street. He noticed 4 men in the sedan trying not to be seen. Lil Vic went back inside and went out another way and went into hiding. This was the beginning of the Third Colombo War. Arena was able to win over most of the capos, but several Persico loyalists refused to bend, including Greg. If Arena wanted to be boss, he had to remove the most dangerous soldier in the Persico forces. Again, Arena reached out to his pal John Gotti for help. John gave the contract to kill Greg Scarpa to Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. After thinking it over for a while, he changed his mind and said that it would make Arena look weak if the Gambinos did his work for him, and he called off the contract. On November 18, 1991, Greg was driving his Mercedes through Brooklyn. He was tailing another one of his cars with tinted windows, being driven by his stepdaughter containing her friend and her 2-year-old daughter. As the car pulled to the intersection of 82nd Street and 12th Avenue in Brooklyn, 2 Chevy vans filled with masked men pulled up and cut the car containing the stepdaughter off. And then shots rang out. The men opened fire on the car, shattering the tinted windows before peeling off. The women and the baby were unharmed. The Arena faction lost the element of surprise when they failed to kill Greg. Despite dropping 70 of his 220 pounds due to his illness and no longer being the big, strong bully, his trigger finger was still healthy. Greg went into hiding and reached out to his FBI handlers, who began to feed him info on his enemies. One of the men waiting in the car for Lil Vic was a Persico man named Henry Smurra. On November 25, 1991, Henry Smurra was shot 3 times in the head by a masked gunman as he sat behind the wheel of his car. On November 29th, Persico man Larry Sessa was ambushed by a dozen men in a busy shopping district. He would survive, but would be arrested for weapons charges and reckless endangerment after the car he was driving struck several pedestrians as he tried to escape the shooters. Greg would make his first move on December 3rd. His target was Arena man Joseph Tolino. Tolino was coming out of a social club on McDonald Avenue around 10 a.m. with 78-year-old Gaetano Amato, a Genovese soldier. When they got a few feet, a man on men appeared and shots rang out. Tolino ran and was shot in the foot. Gaetano Amato was struck several times in the chest and died 40 minutes later. 2 days later, a Persico man named Rosario Black Sam Natasi was shot 5 times in the head and once in the torso while he played cards in the social club he ran on 63rd Street near 10th Avenue in Bay Ridge. His girlfriend was wounded in the chest but would survive. 2 days after that, Greg Scarpa struck again. Arena man Vincent Fusaro, 30 years old, was hanging Christmas lights outside of his home on 11th Street in Bath Beach. At around 4 p.m., a man walked up to him and shot him several times in the head. Fusaro lay dying while carols played in the house and a life-size Santa looked over his body. The FBI, in particular, DeVecchio, was feeding Greg information to keep his main asset one step ahead of his enemies. Greg was told that an Arena man named Joe Waverly Kakachi was gunning for him. But that did little to help Greg in January of 1992 when Greg was driving a car and a car screeched to a halt next to him, and Kakachi dumped several rounds into Greg's car, shattering the windshield. Greg was not hit and was able to return fire before his gun jammed and he had to make an escape. On January 8, 1992, Nicholas Nicky Black Grancio, a 64-year-old arena man, was double parked on McDonald Avenue in his Toyota all-terrain vehicle, talking to his nephew Joseph Tolino, now recovered from being shot in the foot. During the conversation, a masked man walked up to the driver's side and shots rang out. The shooter sent one bullet crashing into the back of Nicky Black's head near his right ear that exited through his nose. Tolino was taken to the station and questioned, but he said that he didn't see what happened. Greg had told his FBI handlers that the hit was going to happen, but when it happened, he told DeVecchio that another captain was responsible for the shooting. Other FBI agents were doing investigations too, and their intel told them that Greg was responsible. Greg would get his revenge on Kakachi a few weeks later, on February 27th, as Kakachi was opening up the Pool Room Social Club on East 14th Street. Greg pulled up in a white station wagon and fired at Kakachi with a .22 caliber rifle, hitting him in the chest. But Kakachi was not dead, and he returned fire, forcing Greg to flee. Kakachi was taken to the hospital where he would be treated and released in a few days. On May 22, 1992, 66-year-old arena man Lorenzo Lampazzi was killed in his apartment building parking lot at 4:30 a.m. when he returned home. Over the next few months, the war would die down when Vic Arena was indicted on murder and racketeering charges. Greg was still not taking any chances. In the summer, he was seen throwing a pistol out of his car window by police. A warrant was issued for gun possession, but when Greg turned himself in, he was charged by the FBI with conspiring to commit murder. The higher-ups in the FBI thought that what DeVecchio was doing was unethical, so they did not inform him of the plans to arrest Greg. In August, Greg went to the hospital again, not feeling well. This time, he tested positive for the HIV virus. This stemmed from the transfusion he received for his surgery in 1986. A few months after his surgery, one of his crew, Paul Melly, died due to the AIDS virus. He was a heroin user who contracted the virus by sharing needles. He was one of those who donated blood. Greg Scarpa filed a lawsuit against the Victory Memorial Hospital and was awarded a $300,000 settlement. Greg pleaded guilty to his gun charge, but due to his failing health, he was given house arrest and had to wear an ankle monitor so the feds could keep a track on him. Greg, now living back in Brooklyn on 82nd Street, was on the shelf, laid up and dying. At around midnight on December 29th, his son Joey Scarpa came in the house upset. Joey was a drug dealer too, and he told Greg that Michael Mickey Flat Top DeRosa and Ronald Messy Marvin Moran, two Colombo associates and rival drug dealers, were encroaching on his territory and threatened his life. Without hesitation, Greg got up, and despite having an ankle monitor, left with Joey and his pal Joe Randazzo. They hopped in a car and headed a few blocks to DeRosa's home on 80th Street. When they arrived at Mickey Flat Top's, he and Messy Marvin were outside. Greg approached Mickey and told him to tell his buddies that he wanted to talk to him alone. He told his guys to stay back, and he and Greg walked off. When they got a few feet, Greg pulled a gun and fired at Mickey, hitting him in the stomach and dropping him to the ground. Greg retreated to the car. As he did, Messy Marvin ran towards the car holding a Taurus 9mm and emptied the magazine at the car. Joe Randazzo, who was in the back seat, was hit 3 times, once in the head. Greg was shot in his nose, causing his left eye to fly out of his head. Greg got out of the car and walked the 3 blocks home. When he got home, he lit a cigarette and poured himself a healthy shot of whiskey. He drank half and poured the other half into the open wound on his eye. Then he answered the call of the police, checking on his ankle monitor. He told them it got wet while he was taking a shower. Now, Greg was tough, but he wasn't that tough. After 15 to 20 minutes, the pain became too much, and he had one of his men take him to an out-of-town hospital. The doctors thought that his wounds were suspicious and called the cops. Greg was taken into custody after being treated. On January 14th, he was ordered to be returned to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Greg was ordered to pay $5,000 a week to the U.S. Marshal to guard his hospital room. In April, he was sentenced on his weapons charge and was sent to Rikers Island's AIDS ward where he could be visited by his family daily while he waited for the end to come. In May, he pleaded guilty to federal racketeering charges in connection with 3 murders that took place during the war: Vincent Fusaro, Nicholas Grancio, and Loris Lampazzi. He was sentenced to life behind bars. In December, the judge will cut his life sentence down to 10 years, and he was sent to the Federal Medical Center in Minnesota, where he died on June 14, 1994. And that, my friends, is the skinny on Gregory Scarpa Sr. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. I hope you learned some things about Greg you didn't know. We are just had the 3rd anniversary of the channel. So now we are in season 4. It's been 3 years, it's flown by. And I want to thank all the guys who've been around since the beginning. All you guys and gals who've been around from the beginning and who saw those old videos and supported from the beginning to help the channel grow. I want to say thank you to all you guys. All right. So if you're new here and you like what we do over here, The Few Bad Men, you want to join the gang, first thing you got to do is you got to bump off that subscribe button. We don't take anybody who hasn't bumped off the subscribe button. Next thing you got to do is you got to break the thumb. Then you got to ring the bell and set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. All right. Go down to the merch store. I'll be putting up some new shirts soon. So just give me a second. Maybe by the next video, I'll have some new shirts out for you guys. All right. If you want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss to help the channel run smooth, the PayPal link is down below. All right. This has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wood nickels. I see yous in the funnies.